Welcome to our deep dive into a region that's becoming a real powerhouse in global trade, the African continent. Specifically, we're going to explore the top 5 ports that are not only handling massive amounts of cargo, but are also driving economic growth and even influencing geopolitics. We've got some fascinating sources lined up, ready to unpack the stories behind these maritime giants. Ready to jump in?
Let's set sail. It's important to understand how these ports fit into the bigger picture. They're not just regional hubs. They're strategically placed gateways connecting Africa to major global markets and playing a crucial role in, those increasingly complex supply chains we hear so much about these days.
Okay, so we're not just talking about ships and containers here. We're talking about Africa's rising influence on the world stage. For example, did you know that one of these ports handles a staggering 95% of a whole country's trade? Or that another is becoming a major hub for automobile manufacturing, rivaling some European production centers? Let's start our journey in Morocco at the port of Tangier Med.
Tangier Med is a fascinating case. It's not just the largest port in Africa, it's also one of the busiest in the entire Mediterranean, handling millions of containers annually. That kind of volume speaks to its strategic location at the crossroads of Africa, Europe, and the Middle East.
And it's not just about moving those containers, right? Our sources highlight how Tangier Med is attracting massive investment from automobile manufacturers like Renault and PSA Peugeot. What's the significance of that for, say, someone in Europe who might be driving one of those cars?
What's happening is that Tangier Med is becoming a key player in the European car market. By offering lower production costs and easier access to new markets, Morocco is positioning itself as a serious competitor in the automobile industry. So yeah, that car you're driving in Europe might very well have been built in Morocco thanks to the efficient connections provided by Tangier Med.
Wow, that's a real shift in the global landscape. Okay, let's head south to Nigeria to the bustling port of Lagos. Our sources describe it as the busiest port in West Africa, handling a huge percentage of Nigeria's imports and exports.
It's important to remember that Nigeria has the largest economy in Africa, so the port of Lagos is a critical part of that economic engine. We're talking about everything from oil exports to consumer goods flowing through this port, making it a lifeline for trade in the region.
But our sources also mention some serious challenges, right? Specifically, congestion and delays that are impacting efficiency.
Yes, congestion is a major hurdle for Lagos. It's something we see in many rapidly growing ports around the world as the infrastructure struggles to keep up with demand. But what's interesting is how Lagos is tackling this challenge. They're not just expanding capacity. They're investing in smart port technology, aiming to optimize operations and streamline cargo handling.
So it's not just about building bigger, it's about building smarter. That seems to be a recurring theme in our sources. Speaking of infrastructure investments, let's look at Mombasa, Kenya's gateway to East Africa.
Mombasa is strategically vital because it serves not just Kenya, but also landlocked nations like Uganda, Rwanda, and South Sudan. Think of it as their lifeline to global markets, handling a significant portion of trade for the entire region. One of the key developments here is the new standard gauge railway connecting Mombasa to Nairobi.
From what I'm seeing in the sources, this railway isn't just about faster cargo movement, it's about facilitating trade and boosting economic growth across the entire region.
That's exactly right. And this focus on improving connectivity within Africa is a trend we're seeing in many countries. By investing in rail networks, highways, and other transport links, they're reducing costs, improving efficiency, and unlocking their economic potential.
It sounds like Mombasa is looking to the future too, with ambitious goals to become a green and sustainable port embracing automation and eco-friendly technologies. Let's shift our focus now to the Horn of Africa, where we find the port of Djibouti, perched on the Red Sea. One fact that jumped out at me was that it handles a mind-boggling 95% of Ethiopia's imports and exports.
Djibouti is a fascinating example of how a port can act as the gateway for an entire landlocked nation. But it's also strategically important for global trade, sitting on one of the world's busiest shipping lanes.
And let's not forget its connection to China's Belt and Road Initiative. Our sources suggest that this initiative is having a major impact on trade routes and infrastructure development, not just in Africa, but around the world. How does Djibouti fit into that puzzle?
Djibouti is a key player in the Belt and Road Initiative, attracting significant Chinese investment and becoming a hub for trade and logistics in the region. This highlights how geopolitical factors can play a significant role in shaping the development of ports and influencing global trade flows.
So we're seeing how these African ports are not just about economics, they're also intertwined with global politics. It's a complex picture, for sure. For our final stop, let's sail to Egypt, to the iconic Port Said. which sits right at the entrance to the Suez Canal. I think most people have heard of the Suez Canal, but can you give us a sense of its significance in today's world?
The Suez Canal is a vital artery of global trade handling a massive amount of the world's cargo traffic. Nearly 12% of global trade passes through this waterway connecting Europe, Asia, and Africa. Its recent expansion has further increased its importance, allowing for larger ships and faster transit times.
And Port Said, as the gateway to this crucial waterway, is strategically positioned to benefit from this increased traffic, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Port Said is more than just a point of transit, though. It's attracting significant investment and developing into a hub for logistics and industrial activity. The Suez Canal Economic Zone, for example, is drawing in global players and boosting Egypt's economic growth.
So each of these ports has its own unique story, its own strengths and
Sure.
challenges. But what ties them together is this incredible growth trajectory and their increasing influence on global trade. We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive, but there's still so much more to explore. What are some of the other key themes we'll be unpacking in the next part? We'll be delving deeper into the challenges and opportunities facing these ports. We'll look at the impact of technological advancements, the push for sustainability, and the role of global partnerships in shaping their future. It's going to be a fascinating journey, so stay tuned. Welcome back to our deep dive into Africa's top 5 ports. In part 1, we explored their impressive growth and strategic importance. But like any success story, there are always challenges to overcome. So let's shift our focus now to some of the hurdles these ports are facing as they navigate a rapidly changing world.
That's a great point. Growth often comes with its own set of, growing pains. One of the most pressing issues for many of these ports is infrastructure. We highlighted some impressive developments like the standard gauge railway in Kenya, but our sources also point out that outdated infrastructure, inadequate road and rail connections, and limited capacity are still major bottlenecks.
So it's almost like having a high-performance engine in a car with a rusty chassis. The potential is there, but the supporting structure needs an upgrade. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
Absolutely, and that's where investment becomes crucial. African ports require significant investment to modernize their infrastructure, expand capacity, and improve efficiency. And we're not just talking about physical infrastructure like cranes and terminals.
You're also talking about digital infrastructure, right?
Yeah,
Things like port management systems, automation technologies, and data analytics platforms. Our sources mention those quite a bit.
exactly. Investing in digital infrastructure is just as important as investing in concrete and steel. And speaking of technology, it's transforming the global shipping industry at an incredible pace. How are African ports adapting to this digital revolution?
That's a great question, especially with all the talk about artificial intelligence, blockchain, and the Internet of Things. I'm seeing those themes pop up in our sources as well. It seems like these technologies could be real game changers for ports, but are African ports keeping up?
They're making strides, but there's still a long way to go. We've seen examples of ports embracing automation like Tangier Med and Djibouti, but widespread adoption of those cutting-edge technologies is still a work in progress. It's not just about implementing the technology, it's about training the workforce and integrating these systems effectively.
And that brings up another question that I'm sure is on a lot of listeners' minds. Jobs, as these ports become more automated, what happens to the people who currently rely on those jobs? Is there a risk that this technological advancement could actually lead to job losses?
That's a valid concern, and it's something that policymakers and port authorities need to address proactively as ports become more automated. Some traditional jobs may indeed be displaced, but it's important to remember that technology also creates new opportunities. The key is to invest in training and education to equip workers with the skills needed for these emerging roles.
So it's not about replacing humans with robots. It's about upskilling the workforce and adapting to the changing demands of the industry. It's about finding that balance between technological advancement and human capital development, right?
Precisely. And it's not just about jobs, it's about ensuring that the benefits of port growth are shared equitably among all segments of society. That means addressing issues like income inequality, access to education and healthcare, and the overall well-being of communities in and around these port cities.
It's about making sure that this economic growth is inclusive and sustainable, not just for the ports themselves, but for the people who live and work in these areas. And speaking of sustainability, we can't ignore the environmental impact of all this activity. How are African ports grappling with the challenges of climate change and the environmental footprint of increased shipping traffic?
Sustainability has become a top priority for many African ports. Our sources highlight a number of green initiatives being implemented, such as using renewable energy sources, reducing emissions, adopting eco-friendly technologies, and improving waste management practices.
Can you give us some specific examples of what these sustainability efforts look like in practice?
Sure, take Mombasa, for example. They're aiming to become a green port by investing in solar power, improving their waste management systems, and implementing environmental monitoring systems. Tangier Med is also incorporating green energy solutions into its expansion plans, and across the board, there's a growing awareness of the need to minimize the ecological footprint of port operations.
So it's not just about economic growth, it's about responsible growth that takes into account the environmental impact. It's about finding that sweet spot where economic prosperity goes hand in hand with environmental stewardship. We've talked about the challenges, but let's shift gears now and look at the opportunities that lie ahead for these ports. What are some of the exciting prospects on the horizon?
One major opportunity is the African Continental Free Trade Area, or SCFTA. This landmark agreement aims to create a single market for goods and services across Africa, and it has the potential to unlock immense economic growth and boost intra-African trade.
I can see how that would be a game changer for these ports. It's not just about connecting Africa to the world anymore, it's about connecting Africa to itself. What are some of the ways that these ports are positioning themselves to capitalize on this opportunity?
They're investing in infrastructure, expanding capacity, and streamlining customs procedures to facilitate the smooth flow of goods across borders. They're also working to improve connectivity within Africa, developing transport corridors and logistics hubs that will link major cities and markets. This integrated approach is essential for maximizing the benefits of the AFCFTA and making African ports even more competitive on the global stage.
And I imagine that global partnerships also play a role in shaping the future of these ports.
Absolutely. Global partnerships are essential for bringing in investment expertise and access to new markets. We've already discussed the impact of China's Belt and Road Initiative, particularly in Djibouti, but other countries like the United States and those in Europe are also engaging in infrastructure projects and trade agreements with African nations.
So there's a lot of interest from around the world in partnering with these African ports.
Yes, and these partnerships can be mutually beneficial for African nations. They provide much-needed investment and expertise for global partners. They offer access to a rapidly growing market and a chance to participate in Africa's economic transformation.
It sounds like the future of African ports is brimming with both challenges and opportunities. As we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what are some of the key takeaways you'd like our listeners to keep in mind?
I think the most important takeaway is that African ports are on the rise. They're dynamic, innovative, and increasingly influential in global trade. They face challenges, but they're also embracing opportunities with determination and vision. It's a fascinating story that's still being written, and it's one that has implications for all of us.
It's a story of growth, transformation, and interconnectedness. And in our final part, we'll explore some predictions and delve deeper into the future of African ports. What trends will shape their growth? What impact will they have on the continent and the world? Stay tuned to find out. Welcome back for the final leg of our journey exploring Africa's top 5 ports. We've covered their remarkable growth, the challenges they face, and the exciting opportunities on the horizon. Now let's turn our attention to the future. What does the crystal ball hold for these maritime powerhouses?
Predicting the future is always a tricky business, but based on what we've learned from our sources, I think it's safe to say that African ports are on a trajectory of continued growth and influence.
So if we're imagining the next decade, are we talking about even more ships, more cargo, more economic activity? What are the key factors that will drive this continued growth?
Well, several forces are at play. First, you have Africa's booming population, which brings with it a surge in demand for everything, from consumer goods to energy and raw materials. This translates into increased imports and exports, more ships calling at ports, and a ripple effect of economic activity spreading out from those ports.
So these ports aren't just gateways for goods, they're also catalysts for broader economic development. But it's not just about population growth, right? We talked earlier about the African Continental Free Trade Area. How will that impact the future of these ports?
The AFCFTA is a potential game changer. By reducing trade barriers and fostering intra-African trade, it's creating a massive single market with enormous potential for growth. This will significantly benefit African ports as they'll play a crucial role in connecting markets, facilitating logistics, and driving that economic growth we're talking about.
We're essentially witnessing the rise of a new economic powerhouse, and these ports are right at the heart of it. But I keep coming back to this question of impact. How will all of this affect the lives of everyday people in these port cities?
That's a crucial question. It's not enough to just talk about economic growth in the abstract. We have to consider the human impact. The growth of ports can bring tremendous benefits like job creation, infrastructure development, and increased revenue. But we have to make sure that this growth is inclusive and benefits all segments of society, not just a select few.
So we're talking about equitable growth that uplifts communities, not just profits. How do we ensure that happens?
It requires a multifaceted approach. We need to invest in education and training to equip local communities with the skills needed for the jobs of the future, particularly in areas like logistics, technology, and engineering. We also need to address potential challenges like displacement and gentrification, ensuring that everyone benefits from the port's growth, not just those who are already well off.
It's about creating opportunities for everyone, not just shifting wealth around. And of course, we can't talk about the future of ports without addressing the environmental impact. As these ports expand and activity increases, how can they balance economic growth with sustainability?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's one that African ports are actively grappling with. The good news is that we're seeing a strong push towards green initiatives, with ports investing in renewable energy sources, reducing emissions, implementing environmental management systems, and adopting more sustainable practices across their operations.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where economic prosperity goes hand in hand with environmental responsibility. It's about building a future where these ports can thrive without compromising the health of the planet or the well-being of communities.
Exactly. It's a complex challenge, but it's one that's essential to address. The future success of these ports depends not only on their ability to move cargo efficiently, but also on their ability to operate sustainably and contribute positively to the communities they serve.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the bustling container terminals of Tangier Med to the strategic waterways of the Suez Canal. It's clear that African ports are at a pivotal moment in their history, poised for a period of significant growth and transformation. What's the one key message you want our listeners to take away from this exploration?
The story of African ports is ultimately a story of potential. It's a story of a continent on the rise, embracing opportunities and shaping its own destiny. It's a story that's still being written, and it's one that has implications for all of us.
It's a story of interconnectedness, of how the flow of goods, ideas, and people across borders shapes our world. And as these African ports continue to grow and evolve, they'll undoubtedly play an even greater role on the global stage. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of African ports.